Thank you for joining today's show, Practical Magic for Crafting Powerful Work Relationships. Your console allows you to customize your experience through actions like maximizing your video window. On the right of the screen is the Q&A tool. You can type in a question at any time and click the Submit button. Now, please welcome your hosts for today's show, Kim Christfort and Suzanne Vickberg.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Kim Christfort. I'm here today with my colleague, Suzanne Vickberg. We are talking today about business chemistry, practical magic for crafting powerful work relationships. Business chemistry is not just a book that we have just finished writing. It's also a way of identifying different working style patterns and knowing what to do once you have that information. I know, Suzanne, we have a lot of callers on the phone today who are eager to share their stories, but I wanted to start first with a brief overview of business chemistry. The thing is, this idea of personality differences or working style differences is not a new one. In fact, I think since the ancient Greeks, there's been some version of personality systems out there. The challenge is, it's not often that practical in a workplace setting. So what business chemistry really lets us do is look for those little clues that will help us to identify what somebody prefers or how they like to behave, and then take action accordingly. So maybe before we go too much farther, Suzanne, could you tell us a little bit about these 4 patterns?
Sure. There are 4 primary business chemistry types. The first is the pioneer, and the pioneer is the type that really values possibilities and brings energy and imagination to a team. And so Kim here is a pioneer. The opposite of the pioneer is the guardian. The guardian is the type that most values stability, and they're really going to bring order and rigor. And I am a guardian, so Kim and I have opposite types when it comes to business chemistry. There's another opposite type pairing, which is the driver that values challenge, and they're the type that really generates momentum. And this is actually Kim's secondary type. The opposite of the driver is the integrator, and that's the type that most values connection, and they really bring people together, and that's actually my secondary type. So between Kim and I, we have all of the types covered, and we are really opposites, with her being a pioneer driver and me being a guardian integrator.
And what's interesting is that everybody is actually a mix of all 4 types, but most people are characterized by 1 or maybe 2 of these types. So it's really powerful when you can work with somebody who brings your complement to what you have, because you do get more of the full set that you might naturally bring to the table.
Right.
Wonderful. Well, Suzanne, I think it would be useful maybe to talk about why we actually wrote a book, because this is something that we've been studying for years. And in fact, when we started, this was something that we really only intended for an internal audience. We work quite a bit with teams, and we wanted to have a way to accelerate our ability to work effectively together. And what we discovered pretty quickly is that business chemistry was a great way for us to get individuals to be able to relate to one another differently, to not say, oh, you're different than me and therefore you totally don't get it, and to be able to flex the strengths of their team to get to better outcomes. And the book was our attempt, I think, to codify a lot of that and to put into practice what we saw through our research, which is that opposites really do work well together.
Yeah, and so maybe I'll talk a little bit about what's in the book so everybody knows why they would want to run out and buy it right away.
They really should run out and buy it right away.
So we cover 3 main sections in the book. We start out with the story that Kim tells a little bit about the origins of business chemistry, where it really all came from. And then we have a section called the Business Chemistry Core. And this is where you learn about the 4 business chemistry types in detail. We share with you how you can figure out what someone else's type is, and then how to use business chemistry responsibly so you're not sort of using it as a way to stereotype people. The second section we call business chemistry electives. And the reason we have a section on electives is people are interested in different things. And this section is really about our research. It goes very in depth. It has a lot of charts and graphs.
Pioneers beware.
Exactly. So Kim and I had a little bit of a conversation like, what do we do about all of this stuff? And I, of course, as a guardian, wanted all of it in there. Kim wasn't so sure about some of it. We put it in this middle section. It's an elective. You can decide whether you want to read it or not. And the final section is business chemistry applications. So we really share, what do you do about all of this? How do you use it? So we highlight the definition of workplace hell for each of the types. What are the situations that they can be in that are very challenging for them? What can leaders and managers do to make that better for people so they're in a situation where they thrive? And what can you as an individual also do to make sure you're in the right environment? Then we talk about flexing. How can you adjust your behavior to work better with someone else? And then finally, we talk about teams. When you bring lots of different people together of all business chemistry types, how do you make them really work together? And one of the really challenging and powerful things about Kim and I writing this book together is that we're opposites. And so we were able to complement each other. We didn't always agree. We worked through it, and it really helped us write a book that can engage all of the types and has a little bit something different to offer to each of them.
Absolutely. Well, I think we should probably take a call. What do you think, Suzanne?
I think that sounds like a great idea.
Excellent. All right. It looks like we have a call coming in from Michelle in New York. Michelle, what's your question?
Hi, Kim and Suzanne. Thanks for taking my call. I am a manager in financial services, and I currently lead a regional planning team, and we've unfortunately just lost one of our key team members, and it's up to me to plug in a replacement from our existing staff, and, I don't get to hire anyone brand new. And so I've heard a lot of soap remedies for how to pick a teammate, like who would I want to share a 3-hour airport layover with and stuff like that. But it sounds like there's a more scientific way to go about it. So I was wondering if you have any recommendations or tips on, what I should look for in this new team member.
Michelle, thank you for your question. So it can be an exciting time to add a new team member because you start thinking about, what could we add to the team? And business chemistry does have a role to play here. We don't typically recommend that you use it as a way to exclude anyone from your team. So we wouldn't recommend you say, we definitely need a guardian in this role, or we definitely need a driver. But we would recommend you use it as a way to think about diversity on your team. So if you take a look at who you've already got, do you have a diverse team in terms of business chemistry types and perspectives, or do you have a lot of one type or maybe two types? And might you want to think about adding some diversity? Because the more diversity you have, the more creative your problem solving is going to be, the more ideas that people will bring up. So we encourage you to think, instead of that airport test like you just described, who would I want to be stuck in an airport with, think maybe about the life raft test. If you were in the ocean in a life raft with no immediate expectation of being rescued, would you want a bunch of people who were all the same, or would you want people with different strengths and also different weaknesses so you could all sort of bolster each other up? That's how I would think about it. Do you have...
I think it's a great point. It is so tempting sometimes to choose to work with people who are like you. It feels natural. You just get into the flow, and you know that they're smart because, of course, they're just like you. So there is a tendency sometimes to get this organizational homogeneity forming as a result of that kind of hiring. But to Suzanne's point, there's a lot of power in bringing in different perspectives. And the way we've described this system, we've talked about it in terms of opposites, because indeed these are opposite points on a spectrum. But in fact, the power of them is when they become complementary puzzle pieces. And so considering that aspect as you look for a new member of the team is great. And hopefully you also like them. Let's go ahead and look to our audience right now and do a poll. So the question is this. You've heard a bit about the styles now. Which of these styles do you think best represents you? You have the pioneers who seek possibilities. They spark energy and imagination. You have the drivers who seek challenge. They generate momentum. You have the guardians who seek stability. They bring order and rigor. And finally, the integrators who seek connection. They bring teams and ideas together. Which do you think you are? Maybe we take a moment while we're doing this to have a word from one of our sponsors.
Oh, and that turns out that the sponsor is us.
The sponsor is us. Can you believe that?
So this episode of Business Chemistry Confessions is brought to you by Business Chemistry, Practical Magic for Crafting Powerful Work Relationships, which is a new book that Kim and I have written together, and which you can get at any online or local booksellers.
Excellent. So answer the poll and then immediately go online and buy the book, please.
That sounds like a great idea. So let's see, do we have results
Do we
starting?
have results in yet? Yes.
It looks like,
Interesting. So we have representation across all 4 types. That's great.
Very good.
Although we have a definite skewing.
Yes.
So Suzanne, your people are in the house.
My people are here in great numbers. We actually have, it looks like, almost 40% guardians on the phone. So 39% of you consider yourself to be guardians. So hi, everybody.
And pioneers, once you guys remember you have this on your calendar and you show up, that'll be really great.
Yeah,
your numbers will go up then, I'm sure.
They're late.
They're running
the pioneers are late. Looks like we have about 11% pioneers. But we've also got drivers and integrators here in about equal numbers. So about 25% drivers and about 25% integrators. Interesting.
All right. So Guardians, we will try to be as data-oriented as we can. But for the few pioneers and drivers out there who want us to get moving, let's go ahead and take another caller. What do you think?
Sounds like a great idea.
All right. So who do we have coming in now? I have a call coming in. Great. We have Stephen from Minneapolis. Stephen, thank you for joining the show. What's your question?
Thanks for taking my call. Well, it's pretty straightforward. I've been in a job that I've been really successful in for about 7 years. It's a mid-sized company, and we've got a cohort of veterans and some new blood that comes in from time to time, but generally everyone clicks. But there's this one guy. We just don't work well together. And the thing is, there isn't any personal animosity behind it. I honestly can't remember ever fighting with him on a specific issue. It's more like we speak past each other in Martian. If you're in the real world, you could probably call this guy an enemy, but you don't really care to improve that relationship. But here's the thing. I actually want to like this person, and I don't know how to. I know you're going to have so-so relationships along with good, but in the business like ours, it's starting to affect our work. We're avoiding each other, kind of passive-aggressive, when people are counting on us to put our heads together. Is there anything I can do to fix this?
This is a great question. It's one we get quite a bit. And actually, even the way you phrased the question, I think is really interesting. You said, we're speaking past one another. It's almost like we're speaking Martian. Business chemistry styles can be a lot like languages. So each of these patterns is essentially a different language. And if someone is speaking a totally different language than you are, it can be really hard to connect. And I think you've already gone a long ways, actually, even in identifying that that's part of the problem. You don't hate the guy, you just really can't speak the same language. So I think the question at this point is, to what extent do you want to learn this person's language versus maybe having a direct conversation with them about the fact that you are speaking different languages and that that's maybe why you haven't been able to come together, and is there perhaps a middle ground that you can reach that would work for both of you? Suzanne, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that what I would suggest is you take a very practical approach to this using the guidance in our book. So in chapter 7, we describe how you can develop a hunch about someone's type. So you've already recognized that you're probably speaking different languages, you may be different types. Figure out what this person's type probably is, and you can do that by going through the steps in that chapter. And once you understand what makes them tick, then you can flex your style to give them more of what they want and need out of an interaction. And we highlight in chapter 16 of the book how you can flex to each of the types. If you try to do that, and if you also talk about it, as Kim suggested, hopefully that person also wants to improve the relationship, and maybe they'll do a little of the same, and you can kind of meet in the middle.
That point is really important. A lot of this is about finding common ground. So if the language that you hunch, if you figure out they're speaking a language that's exactly opposite to yours, that can be hard, and you may need to find a middle ground, or you may need to triangulate. If you both have a common objective and you can at least agree on sort of diagonally moving towards that objective, that can help a lot as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and take another caller. We have Corey calling in from Boston. Corey, thanks for calling in. What's your question?
Hi, Kim and Suzanne. Thanks for taking my call. I heard the other person talking about the best way to fill a spot in a team. And I have a team issue too, but it's a little less cut and dried, so let me explain. I work at a specialty medical practice, and I'm the office manager. None of the doctors report to me, but about a dozen staffers do. And everyone knows how to do their jobs, and honestly, they're really qualified and competent. It's just that when we all get together, it's like a dark cloud looms over the room, and one by one, I've got a bunch of world beaters, and I can almost feel people's IQ points dropping. It's literally a miracle if we can even get a lunch order straight. You know, there are some people who will contribute in the group setting, but others turn into wallflowers, even though they were chatty 5 minutes ago when they were at their desk. Some talk over each other, and some don't even say anything at all. And then there's a select few who wait for someone else to make a comment or suggestion just so they can pounce on it and punch holes in it. It's really, really frustrating. Is this a business chemistry thing? And can your book help me rev up my meetings?
Well, we believe almost everything is a business chemistry thing. Suzanne, you want to talk about this one a little bit?
Yeah, Corey, it sounds like it very well may be a business chemistry thing and that our book can help. You're describing a situation where people are very effective when they work alone, but you put them together and suddenly they're not effective anymore. And that can happen for a variety of reasons. One of them might be that you might have a lot of diversity on your team, and we usually talk about diversity as being a positive thing, that, you know, the more diverse perspectives you have, the more creative ideas you can come up with. But it can also cause conflicts, because if I want to do things my way and Kim wants to do things her way, and Corey, you want to do things your way, pretty soon we've got 3 different ways of wanting to do things and we don't match up. And unlike when you're working alone, when you're on a team, you can't just decide to do things the way you always want to do them.
No, particularly not if people are running around with drugs and scalpels.
Exactly. So I think what I would recommend is that you get a sense of whether you really are working on a diverse team, what is the composition of that team, and then try to figure out whether the way in which the team is working is better for some of those types than others. So, as one example, if you have both pioneers and guardians on your team, they tend to like opposite things in terms of a work environment. So guardians tend to like a lot of structure and very clear expectations, and they're going to thrive in an environment like that. Whereas pioneers like a lot more flexibility and freedom, and they're really going to thrive in an environment like that. So it's hard to create a situation where both pioneers and guardians are going to thrive at the same time. That's what you want to be aiming for, I think.
You're right, and there's a big aspect of this, which is to recognize what we call the bare minimums for each of the types. So again, start with figuring out if you even have all 4 types. If you do, and if diversity is causing the problem rather than helping you, start by saying, all right, what are the things I need to have for each of them? So perhaps it's a clear agenda for the guardians, a very defined outcome for those drivers, some opportunity maybe to brainstorm or go a little off script for the pioneers, and a chance to really connect personally for the integrators. And if you start to compose things that way, not only will you appeal to the different types, but you will get a lot more out of the meeting because you'll be thoughtful in advance around how you're going to compose it. So it's not just a sort of free-for-all or however you happen to prefer things go. It's something that is carefully crafted to get you to the outcomes you need.
And if you check out chapter 17, which is the teams chapter in the book.
By the way, I love that you know all the chapters because I have no idea what's in any of our chapters by chapter number.
I, of course, did the original outline, and so I've been, really
Thank God for you.
Very clear on what all the chapters are in the book. But chapter 17 actually lists those bare minimums for each type, so you can sort of target yourself there. One of the other things that we recommend is then that you try to think in terms of options. So how do you provide people with the things they need but not make it a requirement? So for example, we often talk about the fact that guardians really like to prepare in advance for a meeting. And so they might like a pre-read. They want all of the data so they can review it. Pioneers, on the other hand, don't usually want to read your pre-read. And so if you design a meeting sort of counting on it, then you're going to have some of the people in your meeting won't have read it, and it's going to mess everything up. If you have an optional pre-read, then the guardians get the information they're looking for, and the pioneers aren't forced to spend time with your boring data in advance of the meeting. Also, integrators sometimes like a pre-read because they like to sort of socialize ideas and get other people's input before they come. Drivers might like it if it's short. You know, they don't want a lot of detail in advance, but they like to be clear on what are we doing and why are we doing it. So making it optional is a really great way to meet the needs of multiple types at the same time.
Great point, Suzanne. There's one other thing that you might want to consider, Corey, because you mentioned that some of these people are very engaged and very participatory, maybe when you have them one-on-one, but then suddenly you get them in the group and they don't do anything. There is an aspect of business chemistry which is around introversion, extroversion, and it's actually something that falls across the patterns. So the pioneer type tends to be very outward oriented in general, the guardian tends to be more inward oriented, and then the drivers and integrators actually split across the two. So there's a more outward oriented version of driver called the commander, a more inward oriented called the scientist, a more outward integrator called the teamer, and a more inward called the dreamer. And I bring this up because sometimes what you see happen is those more inward-oriented types might shut down in a group setting unless you are crafting it in a way that they feel that they can be successful or they can contribute meaningfully. So the advice that Suzanne just gave about the pre-read is very helpful for these inward-oriented types that may want to prepare a little bit more so they're very confident coming to the table, or may want to make sure that they're not conflicting with other people's viewpoints. So considering that aspect of it and structuring the interactions accordingly may help you quite a bit. All right, I love all the stories we're getting in about business chemistry, so maybe it's time we go to another poll question. I'm going to mix things up a little bit. Last time we asked you about who you thought you identified with, but interestingly, most people are as defined, if not more, by the things they hate than the things they love. So the question is, which of these situations represents workplace hell for you? You're excited to share a big idea, but all your boss can see is the rounding error in row 37. You get a career-making assignment, but no clear direction on how to carry it out or what a success would look like. Here comes another meeting, which you know won't accomplish anything. Your new team seems much more focused on competing with each other than on collaborating. Let's see what our polls say. All right. Looks like we're getting some results in.
Yeah.
And not totally surprising given who we know is in the audience.
Right. This is interesting. So what we see with the highest numbers is the one that talks about the great new assignment where you don't really have any clear direction and you don't really have any definition of what success is. And that's not surprising because we've got so many guardians on the phone, and I as a guardian would choose that. It really makes a difficult situation for me if I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I know it's really important.
Right. I mean, that would be irritating to a driver too, but for the driver, I am guessing that they chose the one that's more about pointless meetings that have no actual outcome.
Right, and it looks like we have about 21% of folks chose that one. So yeah, I would think that'd be pretty driver.
Yep.
And what do you think the pioneers probably chose?
I think the pioneers are, of course, going to be distressed by people who rain on their parade. Pioneers hate the no because answer. Don't pay attention to that rounding error. It's the big idea that matters.
I think rounding error is a really important issue, actually.
There's a reason why they call it rounding.
Yeah. But it looks like about 14% chose that one. And if I recall, we had about 11% pioneers. So we had some people choosing that who clearly aren't pioneers. It obviously can be a difficult situation for various types.
And actually, I know we have one more to share, but I think you're making a great point that workplace hell is correlated to the types. But of course, a lot of these can be frustrating for everybody. Yeah. And so this is where with business chemistry, it's really important not to stick people in a box and leave them there forever. Everybody is going to have some aspects of a type, but some ways that they're different. And the hell stuff is a great example of that. So what's our final one?
Well, the final
Process of elimination. We probably figured it out.
Yeah, so that's the one about isolation or feeling like there's more competition than there is collaboration. It looks like about 26% of people chose that one, that not feeling like that was a great situation for the new team that they're on.
And it's interesting, too, because this is a situation that's complete hell for an integrator, potentially, but actually could be wonderfully appealing to a driver. Right. Yeah. Drivers of all the types actually feel closer through debate. They love competition, and so that may be their idea of a dream day at the office, whereas this poor integrator is like, oh, please, can we just collaborate a bit more?
And that's one of the challenging things about teams is one person's hell is another person's heaven, and you've got a real challenge trying to meet everybody's needs at the same time.
Purgatory? Is that in the middle? All right. I think we should maybe take another caller. What do you think?
Great idea.
All right. So let's see. I think we have a call coming in. Yes, we do. We've got Sophia calling in from New York. Sophia, you're on the line.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call, Kim and Suzanne. I'm a big fan.
Well,
Are
thank
ready
you.
for a twist? The problem here is me.
Oh.
I'm in a workplace similar to what Stephen described earlier in the call. Everything seems to click except for me. Sometimes it's like I'm not even there. You can see that I sort of feel left out. I get good reviews, I make my numbers. We're in commercial real estate, just to clarify. And it's not like I'm fighting with anyone. I just don't seem to make a difference in the room. No one listens to me or asks my opinion ever. So what do you think I can do using business chemistry to help me be the person my teammates want to hear from?
Sophia, thank you for calling in and for sharing that question. I think it's brave to actually flag yourself as the source of a potential challenge. It's interesting because it is potentially very isolating if you are a different style than everyone else and you contribute in a different way. And it can feel almost as if there's a whole culture of working style or personality that you're not a part of. So one of the best things to start with is probably an assessment of what is your style, what's the style of the group? Is that really what's happening here? Are you just speaking different languages as we've talked about before? If that is in fact the case, if you are a very different business chemistry style than the rest of the group, and that's the reason why you maybe feel left out, you have a choice to make. We just talked about hell with the polling question. So I think part of the choice is, are you okay in this environment? Can you make it work for you, or is it sort of sucking a little bit of your soul away every day and you don't want to go there anymore? And that's okay. And we do talk about that a lot in the book. If, however, though, you actually feel like this is the place you want to be, you do want to find a way to work, and maybe you can grin and bear it for a little while, then it's a question of how you can perhaps flex to show up differently with the team and maybe bend a little bit in their direction so that your style isn't necessarily always going to be in your home zone. You're going to have to move out of it a little bit. I actually used to do a lot of work in mergers and acquisitions, and I am, as you've heard, a very strong pioneer. So for me to be poring over those detailed spreadsheets day in and day out was really, really painful. And I felt like you sometimes that everybody was just sort of doing their own thing, and I was like a fish out of water a bit. I wanted to stick with it though, and so I did what I needed to do for a period of time, and then I was able to do all the other parts of the job that I really loved. So I think now is a great time for a little bit of self-reflection and maybe checking in whether business chemistry could help to bridge the gap between you and the rest of the group.
Sophia, I totally know how you feel. I am often the one who's the fish out of water on our team. I'm a guardian, as I've said, and on the Greenhouse team with Kim, we have an awful lot of pioneers. And so I sort of don't fit in all the time, and I don't really do things the way that other people do them. And being an introvert, I can tend to be a little quiet. So I really have had to make a little bit of an effort to fit in. But I also lean into my strengths, because those are the things that I bring that a lot of the other people on the team don't have. So trying to find that combination is really the key. You don't want to give up who you are, because if you're different from everyone else, you're probably bringing something that other people can't bring. But you do want to be able to fit in, and as we've been talking about languages, you need to be able to speak the same language. If you're speaking Spanish and everybody else is speaking English, or vice versa, they're not going to be able to understand you.
You're making a super important point, though, Sophia, and I think that it's worth considering whether there's somebody in the group that you feel you could reach out to have a direct conversation about this. One of the things that we did very early on, Suzanne and I, was we had a conversation about the fact that she did feel different than the rest of the group, and how could we make that be something that worked for us rather than working against her in particular, and the group losing that value. And I kind of think of Suzanne as this wonderful guardian focal point for our team. We've got all these sort of balloons flying off in multiple directions, and Suzanne's there holding the strings and keeping us together. So we've been able to craft this in a way that really does honor the fact that she's different. She still has to flex a lot to accommodate us, but it works. But I don't think we would have gotten there if she had just remained silent about it. The fact that we had a conversation that she felt comfortable enough to reach out and talk about it made a big difference.
Yeah, and then hopefully you can have that conversation. And then Kim mentioned the Hell Is chapters in the book. Those are chapters 12 through 15.
For those of you tracking on your at-home bingo sheet.
And if you look at the chapter about your own type, it's going to give some specific advice that hopefully you'll find relevant for what you might need to do to flex your style a little bit. So for example, in the Guardian chapter, it says things like, sometimes you have to speak up even if you're not sure yet that your idea is really smart, because Guardians tend to hold things back until they're really sure. Well, if there's a bunch of pioneers talking all the time and I'm always holding back, it'll mean I literally never say anything and everyone will think I don't have anything to say. So I need to stretch there. And each of the chapters has different ways that the types may need to stretch when they find themselves in a situation that's just not really working for them.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We obviously love talking about this topic, and hopefully you enjoyed it as well. My great hope is that coming out of watching this, you're going to go out in the world and see these business chemistry patterns everywhere. Because the truth is we are surrounded by this stuff all the time, but so often it's just noise that we ignore or we don't make best use of. And so once you start looking for these little clues, hopefully you'll start seeing them pop up everywhere, and then you'll be able to use it to really make a difference in your relationships, whether that's one-on-one or with a team. Suzanne, any final thoughts?
Yes, I think I would just add that, some people are really good at this stuff. They sort of very naturally understand other people's perspectives. They're able to intuit what people want and need. This book is really for the rest of us. It's for those of us who need just a little bit of help, a reminder that other people are different from us, a little bit of guidance about how to go about understanding other people, flexing so that they get more of what they want and need from you. And really that means you're going to get more of what you want and need from them. And it's going to be better for everybody.
Great point. I know many of you buy business books and you read the first couple of pages and then maybe stick them on your shelf and never look at them again. We hope you don't do that with this book. This book was written to appeal to the 4 types. And so for our majority guardians out there, we do have lots of data, lots of facts, although I admit a lot of those are in the appendix. I told Suzanne we had to do that, but it is in there. And for drivers, we get to the point, it's very results oriented. For our pioneers, tons of pictures, really appealing stories, and integrators, we really do connect this to people. We bring it to life, make it real. So please do check out the book. And remember, as you go out into the world, it's not rocket science, but it is business chemistry. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
If you want more information, you can go to our website at Deloitte.com, and the URL is here for your reference. Have a great day.